Verse 14 says, these will make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb will overcome them. For he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and those who are with him are called, chosen, and faithful. Verse 14 is great. These nations, the Antichrist, religious Babylon, is going to make war with the Lamb. Who is the Lamb? Jesus Christ. Big mistake. You don't want to be warring against Jesus. They're going to make war with the Lamb. Verse 14 tells us that the Lamb is going to win. The Lamb is going to be victorious. This is talking about the Battle of Armageddon, which we talked about last week. We'll talk more about it when we get to chapter 19. Notice how Jesus is described in the middle of verse number 14 as Lord of lords and King of kings. Literally, it's master of masters, ruler of rulers. That's the Jesus that we serve. He's Lord of lords. He's King of kings. And the last part of verse 14 I really like. And those who are with him are called, chosen, and faithful. When Jesus Christ comes back in his second coming, he's not alone. Guess who comes back with him? You and me as the church. Jude, verses 14 and 15, say that when he comes back in his second coming, he's coming back with 10,000s of his saints, which is an idiom, a figure of speech for a whole bunch of them or a lot of us. Like we say a ton, they say 10,000s. When Jesus comes back, he's coming back with 10,000s of his saints with his church to, Jude verse 15 tells us, to execute judgment, to set the world straight, essentially, is what Jude tells us there. Notice how you and I are described there at the end of verse number 14. He comes back, those who come back with him, us as the church, are described as the called, the chosen, and the faithful. The called, the chosen, and the faithful. Jesus has called every single one of us in this room. Back in John chapter 10, verses 1 through 6, it talks about how Jesus uses this analogy of him being the shepherd, and he calls his sheep by name. Jesus has called each and every one of us by name to follow him, just like he did with John, with Peter, with Simon, with Andrew, all of these guys, as he called his disciples back then. He's done the same for you and me as well. He's called us. He's not only called us, he's also chosen us. This brings me comfort because it proves to me that Jesus isn't stuck with me. He wasn't like, dang, how'd I end up with Hagen? No, he actually chose me. Unlike my middle school dodgeball team that never chose me because I can't throw a ball worth anything, Jesus looks at us, every one of us in this room, and he says, I'm going to pick you. I'm going to choose you. And when I think about that, I go, look, I don't want to offend you, but I probably wouldn't choose you if I had the choice, right? I wouldn't choose me. It's like, out of anyone, Jesus, you chose this group of people in this room? And he goes, yep, I chose these people. Okay, why? Why did Jesus choose us? Because he has the ability to see our potential. He does this with Abraham. He changes his name from Abram to Abraham. Even before he had any kids, he called him a father of many nations. He does it with Simon to Peter. Even when Peter wasn't rock solid, Jesus calls him the rock because he could see the potential in him. And so too with you and me. He chooses us not because of who we are, but because of who we're going to be one day when we are presented as his bride, faultless before the throne because of his righteousness. We are called, we are chosen, and lastly, we are faithful. The good news about that is 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 13 tells us, even when we are faithless, he remains faithful.